All right, thank you everyone for attending. My name is Jeff Batt, and welcome to this webinar on building learning interactions using Adobe Edge Animate. First of all, just want to make sure that my audio is coming through okay. If you can hear me, just go ahead and type in that you can hear me in the question and answer area. Okay. All right, it looks like everyone can hear me fine, so let me go ahead and get started here. Okay, so this is one of the eLearning Brothers' first webinars of a series that we're going to be doing once a month or a couple times a month. And we wanted to start out with some of the new interactions that we have with eLearning Brothers and basically show you how to build your own learning interactions in Adobe Edge Animate, as well as use some of the learning interactions that you may have available inside of the eLearning Brothers template library if you're a subscriber as well. And so even if you're not a subscriber, this content is going to be useful to you because it's going to allow you to build your own different types of interactions in Adobe Edge Animate and go from there. Let me go ahead and start sharing my screen here. So like I mentioned before, my name is Jeff Batt. I am with the eLearning Brothers. I'm the product development manager, so I'm in charge of the template library here at the eLearning Brothers. So all the subscriptions, or when you subscribe to the template library, when you have access to the Flash games, storyline games, the Captivate layouts, the Captivate players, and everything like that. That's my main role is to develop those different types of templates, to develop the different types of graphics and everything, to work with my team to have the most robust content inside of the library there. So now, as far as this session goes, if you wanted to sign up, the files that we're going to be using are going to be found at elearningtemplates.com, and you can sign up for a freebie account. Everything that I'm going to be doing today, you can download those files from elearningtemplates.com if you're not already a subscriber. If you are a subscriber already, you can go ahead and just download the files that I'm talking about. As well as these slides, there is the URL for the slides. If you go to that, you can download view on slideshare.com or slideshare.net. You can view the slides and as well as my notes on each of the page of the slides. So you can see the code hints that I put, what each different window does inside of Adobe Edge Animate, and that gives you a lot of good content, good information there. So before I get started though, let me go ahead and first of all tell you what our session objectives are going to be. I like to clearly define what we're going to talk about during this session. And then I want to get to know you guys. I want to get to know what type of users are you, if you already know Edge Animate. So we'll get into that. But as far as the session objectives, we're going to be learning how to get started with the Adobe Edge Animate. We'll learn about what is Adobe Edge Animate as well, if you've never heard of it, or if you're just hearing of it. We're going to talk about exploring the Edge Animate UI, how to navigate through different things, what different panels, what different windows are, and really how to use that to your advantage to be able to create these different types of HTML-based learning interactions. We'll be using external assets, how to work with images. We'll also talk about how to work with audio files and image files and video files, which is not natively supported by Edge. But it's something that you use inside of your learning interactions, so it's definitely something that I want to go over. How do you use this type of, how do you even use a video inside of your Edge Animate learning interactions? How do you use audio? Again, you can't just import audio into Edge. It's something else that you have to do in order to use it, so we'll talk about that. Now, one of my favorite features inside of Edge Animate is the flexible layouts, because there are so many devices, especially when you're working with mobile, there are so many things to take into consideration as far as width, height, when an orientation change, different things like that. And so Adobe Edge Animate does this very well. Whenever you can have things change, whenever it rotates, you can have things change on different widths and heights. And they use something called flexible layouts. And then you can get into more detailed coding if you wanted to, but we'll just talk about flexible layouts for now. We'll talk about a little bit of animation, because whenever you're creating learning interactions, you are going to be using animation. So I want to make sure we probably won't spend a whole lot of time on that, but we will go over a little bit of animating. And one of my favorite tools inside of Edge Animate is the pin tool, how to use the pin tool for animating. And I come from a Flash development side, so I totally wish I would have had the pin tool when I was developing inside of Flash. It's a great tool, and I'm going to show you how to use that, as well as adding easing onto your animations, and then working with symbols. If you're familiar at all with Flash, if you're not, that's fine. But we'll talk about what symbols are, using nested symbols, timeline labels. Now this is really important when you're creating learning interactions, is being able to jump to different spots inside of your timeline, as well as timeline triggers. If you want, when the timeline plays, if you want something to happen at a certain point, you can add triggers there. Playing audio in JavaScript, down level stage, what happens if they go to this content from a non-HTML5 compatible browser? Because the content that gets produced from Adobe Edge Animate is HTML5. So if they're going to it from IE6, what do? Well, the down level stage helps you with that. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Deployment, where you can get it, and then using iframes as well as scripting in Edge Animate using the code panel as well. Okay, so that's our session objectives. I wanted to go over that real quick, but now I want to get to know you guys a little bit. This session is being recorded, so if you want to refer back to it at all, we're going to be posting it on our website, and so you can refer back to it, and you can pause it at certain points if I went too fast and you want to review something else. Keep in mind that we will be posting this, and so you can go back in and review it all you want, so you don't have to get it all in this 1 hour that we're going to be talking about here. All right, so let's go ahead and get into the content here. Let me hide this real quick. So let's talk about what Edge Animate is. Since the majority of you have never really used it, let's just start from the beginning basically. Edge Animate is basically a stage-like area, kind of like if you're working with After Effects. If you've ever worked with Flash, if you've ever worked with Captivate, which the majority of you have worked with Captivate, you have a stage area with different elements from your library that you can drag on, you can drop, you can rotate, you can expand, you can stretch out, you can make smaller. Your basic stuff that you find in many different Adobe products, basically. So it's very similar. If you know how to use one Adobe product, you can catch on to the concept pretty easy to the other ones, especially if you're familiar with Captivate, or if you're familiar with Flash especially, or After Effects. That's really what it is you're placing this content onto the stage, and then you're animating this content. So you're going from one point to another point, you're animating in a circle, you're animating in an image, you're animating in some text. And then the nice thing though is the export of this content is all HTML. So you don't have to worry about if it's going to work on a mobile device. It doesn't have to have any type of plugin or anything like that. The content itself will work on iPhone, it will work on iPads, it will work on Android devices, it will work on any HTML5 compatible browser. And then like we talked about before, there's ways for the non-HTML5 compatible browsers to be able to display something so it's not just a blank screen or anything. Well, that's great, especially if you're a web developer, but what about if you're a learning developer? How does this kind of work, all these different aspects kind of work with learning? Well, a couple of years back, you would, if you're at all familiar with the learning kind of field, if you needed something very custom, if you wanted a custom interaction or a custom game or anything like that, well, your solution for that would be going to Flash. And so you would be able to produce something inside of Flash, and it's a very custom game, custom look, and then you would take that SWF, the output of that Flash file, and then you would bring it into Captivate, you would bring it into Articulate Studio, you would bring it into Lectora or whatever tool that you're using, basically. Well, since Flash is really not supported on mobile devices, because it's only SWF output, that's really where Edge comes into play. Because Edge itself will produce HTML5 content. So the content that you produce will work on any type of mobile device and any type of HTML5 compatible browser. And so that means you can take this HTML5 content that you produce inside of Adobe Edge Animate, all the different animations and the clicks and different things like that. You can produce very similar types of interactions that you can in Flash, and then you can have it work on all different types of browsers just by itself. So if you wanted to take that as kind of like a learning support app or something like that, you wanted to not necessarily inside of an e-learning course, you could do that through just regular web development. You could also even wrap it up inside of PhoneGap if you wanted to create your own PhoneGap installable application. You could do that inside of Edge Animate and do that and bring that inside of PhoneGap. But the nice thing as well is you can take this export just like you could with Flash, or if you're even not familiar with Flash, but you could still take this type of output content and import it inside of any e-learning authoring tool. So Articulate Storyline, Lectora, or Captivate. Basically, this allows you to get more custom animations. It allows you to get a little bit more flexibility, in my opinion, and then you can insert it inside of the pages that you want inside of your e-learning authoring tool. So it's not meant to take the place of an e-learning authoring tool. It's only meant to enhance the different types of pages that go beyond the functionality of your current e-learning authoring tool, basically. And also, you can take that same export, the HTML file, and you can export it to iBooks Author or any other type of ebook that allows HTML5 content. And so it's really expandable of what you can do. You're not stuck with one tool. You can basically take this HTML5 content and export it out into multiple different types of output, basically. Now, if you have questions, feel free to type in the questions. I may not have time to look at them throughout the presentation, but I will at the end go through the questions and make sure they're all answered inside of there. So really the type of stuff that you can build inside of Edge Animate is really, the sky's the limit at this point. So you can build, like I have a bunch of interactions here, the game show interaction, our millionaire interaction, our world race interaction, all these different types of things you can build inside of Adobe Edge Animate. So it's like Flash for HTML, and I say that a lot, is if you're wanting to do what you did with Flash, then definitely check out Edge Animate and learn as much as you can from Edge Animate. Now, where do you get Edge Animate? You can find it at html.adobe.com, and if you go there, let me actually navigate to our web here, and let me go to html.adobe.com. And so the first thing that you see is Adobe Edge Animate CC. If I click on Learn More, I can try it out. I get 30 days for free. I can learn a little bit more about that. Or I can click on Plan Options. If I click on Plan Options, this allows me to sign up for the Creative Cloud, or I can sign up. You don't have to sign up for the Creative Cloud through Adobe. You can actually sign up for just a single app. If you select this single app, click on Join, scroll down to Adobe Edge Animate, you'll notice that Adobe Edge Animate itself is only $15 a month. Previously in the older versions it was free, but now it is either $15 a month or it is part of your Creative Cloud. So if you already have $49 Creative Cloud membership with Photoshop, Illustrator, everything else like that, then you will have Adobe Edge Animate as part of your package there. So I just wanted to show you how to get to the Adobe Edge Animate and download it and install it from there. Okay, so when you launch Adobe Edge Animate, this is the very first screen that you'll see. And when you see this screen, the very first thing over on the left-hand side is some in-app lessons. Now, I recommend going through these because they will show you step-by-step on how to get started with this. Now, when you're starting a new project, and I'm going to rush through some of this, so I apologize, just so we can get through the interactive content. When you're starting a new project, you basically click on Create New, and then you hit Save. As soon as you hit Save on your project, it basically will save this project and all of the files that are associated with this project into that folder. So let's go ahead and launch Adobe Edge Animate. So here's my Adobe Edge Animate project, or my application basically. And over on the left hand side I have Create New, and then I also have Create from Template if you're running Edge Animate CC. If you're running an earlier version, then all you have over on the left hand side is Create New. You can also click on any recent projects that you've been working with, but for now I'm just going to go ahead and click on Create New. And this starts me out with the Edge Animate's user interface that I can start tweaking and modifying it how I want. Now, the first thing I want to do though is I want to save this project so it's all contained within the same location. So if I hit Control S or Command S, it'll prompt me for the location of where I want to save it. I want to save all of these files within a folder, so I want to first of all create a folder. And this runs on Mac and PC. Right now I'm currently on a Mac, but if you're on a PC only, this will run fine, just fine on a PC, so keep that in mind. So the folder is whatever I want to name it. So if I'm creating like a tab interaction, maybe I want to name it tabs, and then click on create. Now this will create the folder on my desktop, and now I just name the main file. The main file is basically the file that's going to be brought inside of whatever tool that you're using. Now this is important because typically if you're a web developer, or even if you're not a web developer, kind of the standard of the main file is to name it index. But the problem with some of the e-learning authoring tools that you may be bringing this into is it will have an issue with the name index, especially Lectora. If you're bringing this inside of Lectora output uses an index file already, so it's actually going to replace that index file and you're going to have some issues. So typically what I like to do is just name it whatever the name of the interactions that you're going to use. It really doesn't matter, but I'm going to name this tabs and then click save. Now as soon as I do that, if I hide Edge Animate and go to this folder that was just created, these are all my different files that are inside of Edge Animate. So you'll notice that I have an HTML file here, and so let me make this a little bit bigger. So I have an HTML file. I also have a tabs.an file, and then some .js files, which are JavaScript files, and then a folder called edge_includes. You don't need to know what all these files do, except for the first two files. The first two files, the HTML file will become important, especially when you're working with sound. But the only other file that you need to know is the .an file, which has the Edge Animate logo on it. Now this is the file that you need. If you've closed out Edge Animate, this is the file that you need in order to open it up again, especially if it's not within your recent projects list. This is the file that if you double click on will open up Edge Animate. Also, if you're working with the template library and you come to like Adobe Edge Interactions and you download one of these project files, that's the file that you use in order to open up that Edge Animate project file basically. So that's just an important file, and I wanted to emphasize that a little bit before we got into this a little bit more. Okay, so now that we're inside of Edge Animate, let me walk you through some of the different windows and the different panels that you're working with inside of Edge Animate. The main one, the center one, is your stage area. Now you can adjust these just like you can with any other Adobe product. So you can see our window here, this white area is the stage area, the content area. And I can change this content area to whatever size that I want. So if I have a for sure size, 920 by 540 or whatever I'm working with, actually, yeah, I can come over to the properties panel, which is over on the left hand side, and I can change the different elements for this stage. And so you can see the width and the height here. I can go ahead and change this to 720 by 540. Now, if you're working with Storyline, if you're working with Captivate or anything like that, it's good to know what size you will fit inside of Storyline, whatever project you're working with. You can resize Storyline to whatever size you want, so it's good to know what that size is if you want it to fill the entire screen or if you just wanted it to be at the bottom of the screen. It's pretty much up to you. I can't really tell you the for sure size. I know the default Storyline size is 720 by 540. And so that's what I have here, 720 by 540. So it's made my window a lot bigger, and I have some other, inside of my properties panel, I have some other things that I can do as well. The first thing is I can change the color of the background by selecting on this square here. This will pop open a color picker. I can just find whatever color I'm looking for here, select the color, or I can enter in a RGB color, a hex value if I have a certain hex value, or I can use the eye color or eyedropper to select a color that I have somewhere else basically. The other thing is how dark do I want this color. I can change working from the lighter version of that color to a darker version of that color, which is really nice if you're working with gradients. And then I can change the alpha. If I wanted to change the alpha of that color, doesn't really work too well on the backgrounds, but if I did want no background at all, I can just drop that alpha down to the bottom, and that way it won't have any background color at all. Now, the other option right next to it is actually a gradient. Now, if I wanted a gradient for my background color, I select this option instead of the first option. Now, this option has 3 different tabs up on top. I can choose from a linear gradient or a radial gradient, and if I hold down the radial gradients, I can choose what type of radial gradient I want as well. Now, with the radial gradients, I have different points here. It goes from white to purple by default. And I have different points that I can choose, and I can adjust my gradients. So if I wanted it to go from like a dark red, like a light red in the middle, to a dark red, I can do that as well, and adjust the colors, have more specific colors if I wanted to. I'm not going to get really too detailed into the coloring. You can play around with that. You can also choose repeating if it's going to extend out, or if you're working with flexible layouts, so keep that in mind. But that's how you change the background color. Now, one nice thing is if I wanted to preview this, the only thing I have to do is hit Control-Enter on a Mac or on a PC, or Command-Enter on a Mac, and this will preview what I've done so far. So far I just have a background. It's just a radial gradient basically in the background, and that's pretty much it. Well, it's a set size of this, and so if I'm working with different layouts, if I wanted to make sure that it expands from a smaller screen to a larger screen, that's where I would get into something called the flexible layout. If I come back into Adobe Edge Animate, I can actually change this the 720 and 540 dimensions into percentages. So that way it actually will expand out to whatever percentage that you choose. And so if I click the PX value over on the left hand side, and it changes it to 100%, and then hit Control-Enter, it will actually contain or take automatically 100% of my browser resolution. So no matter what screen size that I'm on, it's going to be 100% of that resolution. Same thing with the height. So if I come over to height and change that to percentage as well, hit Control-Enter, now it's going to always take up the maximum width and height of my browser, no matter what size it is, basically. Now, that takes a little bit of getting used to, so you can adjust different objects to automatically be at certain percentages, or go bigger, smaller at certain percentages as well, so keep that in mind. Now, if you wanted to, because if you have like a browser that's, you may have a browser that's like tremendously, can handle a lot of width, basically, like an iMac 27-inch or something like that. If you wanted to, you can establish a minimum width and a maximum width. So you can say, okay, this cannot go below this certain number of width, and this cannot go above this number of width as well. So if I change my width to 100%, and then I come down to the minimum width and say, okay, this cannot go below 300, and go to the maximum width, I have to select the maximum width label first of all, uncheck where it says none, and now I can choose 700, whatever I wanted to. I can change this to pixels or percentages. So let me go back to that. Okay, so right now I've established the minimum width as 300, the maximum width as 700. And now you can see that it will not go beyond 700, but if I adjust it down, it will adjust down to 300, but not go below 300, basically. So that's how you start working with flexible layouts, depending on what your target audience is, depending on how you're going to be using this. That's how you come in here and start working with that, basically. But I'm going to, for now, just kind of go back to the default there. So let me just pause to make sure there's not any pressing questions. A couple questions is HTML5 using what? jQuery, JavaScript. It's using Edge Animate JavaScript as well as jQuery JavaScript. So if you're familiar with jQuery, this is a great tool for you because it actually already integrates with jQuery, and you can start using jQuery commands to go with that. Now, Internet Explorer, we're going to be talking about that in a little bit, if it works with Internet Explorer as well. What about inside Articulate Studio Pro? Articulate Studio Pro, you can import as a web window. And so you could take this and you could put it in this web window. However, I have not tested it with the Flash version, so that's one thing to keep in mind. Okay, so That's all the questions we have so far. So let me go ahead and start working with some other things. So we've talked about the minimum width, we talked about the maximum width. Overflow is if you have like a content or if you have something animating from like outside of the window, inside of the window. Well, if your overflow is set as hidden, then that content won't be visible. So if I hit Control Enter, you'll notice that rectangle is not visible over on the left or right hand side. Well, if I select this to visible and hit Control Enter, you'll notice that rectangle is now visible. Now, that may, for the stage area, you may always want to have this set as hidden, or you may want to have it set as scroll. If you have it set as scroll and you have something down at the bottom here, hit Control Enter, it will actually, you could scroll down to that content. So it'll stay within the set window, but it'll automatically add a scroll bar. So if you have a lot of text or something that you're scrolling through, that's a way that you can have that or add that is by adding scroll and then just importing your content, placing it down here, and so it'll scroll down to there basically. But for the most part, I usually keep that hidden, and so that way if I have some stuff that's going to be animating in, it's hidden until it actually gets animated in. Now when you're working with other things like the text box area, you can select objects like movie clips. If I right click on this and go to convert to symbol, and this is how I convert it to a movie clip. On that movie clip, I can also establish if outside of that movie clip is visible, hidden, scroll, or as well. So if I wanted to come in and say scroll here, and then come into that movie clip, and you go into a movie clip by double clicking on it, and then adding some text here. So let's just start adding some text down at the bottom. Go back here. You'll notice that it's not all of that text is visible because the movie clip, the outside of it is set to scroll. So if I hit Control Enter, I can still scroll within it, and if I was on a mobile device, I would just basically use my finger to scroll just like you do on a normal mobile device. But I can still establish kind of a scroll area. If I wanted the text to be a scroll area, that's how you would do it. So you would convert it to a movie clip, and then you would come over to the properties and you would select scroll, or you would select hidden. And hidden basically would not allow me to see anything, even though it's kind of on the stage still, it still would not allow me to see anything beyond that certain area. So you can create masks and stuff like that inside of here. We'll get into movie clips a little bit later. Down level stage is right here. This basically says if you're on Internet Explorer, like IE6 or something, if you click on edit here, you can have some text, establish some text that says you need to go to this from a HTML5 compatible browser, whatever you wanted to type. And you can also insert an image if you wanted to insert an image here as well. That way, it's not just blank if I go to it from Internet Explorer. It's basically, you basically establish whatever it is here. Now there is a plugin for old browsers that I'll talk about once we get into deployment, but that's for now, that's how you would use it. Now, if you're going to be exporting this over to like iBooks Author, for example, then you would want to establish a poster, which is the image before they go into the interaction. And you do that by capturing an image. You can capture whatever point of the timeline you want, and it would basically, that would be the image before they go into it. And then one of the nice things about this is when I was working with Flash, one of the hardest things that I found to do was a preloader. And just a simple loader, and I don't know why it was so hard, but inside of Edge Animate, inside of the stage, you can actually select a preloader right here by selecting the preloader section, clicking on Edit, going to Insert Preloader Clip Art. You have all these different preloaders, which is what the learner will see before the content is ready, that you can basically insert inside of your interaction. So if I select this preloader, click on Insert, you can see this is what the learner will see before the interaction is ready. Then I can add some text as well, loading, interaction, and go ahead and change whatever font size. Whenever you have text selected, you can change the font size and font color inside of your properties panel. And then just kind of drag and drop that into position. So now if it's taken a while, if they're on LTE or if they're on, whatever, if they're on like a mobile device, basically this is just a way so they know that it's coming and it'll automatically load. They'll see that, and then once it's loaded, it'll automatically go away. Now, that's a whole lot easier than it was inside of Flash, and so it's just basically a way to establish a preloader in there. Okay, so that's the properties panel for the actual stage area. The next thing I want to cover is the tools. Up on top, you have your different tools. You have your selection tool, you have a transform tool, clipping tool if you wanted to clip different parts of the of your different elements on your stage. Then you have your simple kind of shapes tool. If you select the rounded corner, circle tool, and then a text tool as well. So if you wanted to insert some text, you just select the text, select anywhere on the stage, and then a little text box will pop open. So you can just type in your text. Now over the properties panel changes depending on what you have selected. So now over on the left hand side I have a text. I can change the fonts. I can also change the font size, color, positioning, underlined, bold, italics, and different things like that, as well as transform and shadows and different things that I don't have too much time to go over that. But if you wanted to use a custom font, one of the nice things in Adobe Edge Animate CC is it integrates really well with Adobe Web Fonts. So if you're at all familiar with web fonts, it's just basically additional fonts that are really nice looking that you can add on to Adobe Edge Animate. So you can come over to fonts, click on plus, and you can search through all their fonts and add custom fonts to your project as well. So you can either use Edge web fonts or you can embed other fonts. So if you have a certain standard font within your company, you can do that as well. Okay, I'm not going to spend too much time on fonts or anything like that, but those are your different tools that you can work with, and then you can come up to File and then Import, and you can import images as well. So if you select the drop-down box for the images, you can see what type of images you can import. You can import PNG files, GIF files, JPEG files, and SVG files. SVG files are basically like Illustrator files that don't get pixelated when you expand them and you stretch them out. So you can animate those and you get a lot better resolution with SVG files than you would with PNG files if you're stretching them out, if you're making them smaller or anything like that. Excuse me. So keep that in mind. It depends on what files you're working with. But really, by default, Edge Animate can only import PNG files or JPEG files or GIF files, basically. Now, if you're working with SVG files, keep also in mind if you're going to export this out to iBooks Author, it will actually not work. As iBooks Author does not support SVG files, so you'd have to use PNG or JPEG files or anything like that. So, okay. So now let's go ahead and talk a little bit about animation. So I'm going to create a box on the screen here, and I'm going to place this box over on the left-hand side. And on the left-hand side, I can see my properties here. I can see my color. I can change the color of the box. I can change the width, the height, the X and the Y position of this. Now the X position goes from across. The Y position goes up and down. So you're working with X and Y, similar to other authoring tools that you may be familiar with, basically. Now, if I wanted to animate this, if I wanted to have it animate from one side to the other, I do this by using the timeline down at the bottom. Now, the timeline down at the bottom basically allows me to see all the objects on my stage currently, and so now I can animate this object going from one point to the other point, or as many points as I want, basically. Now, there's a couple different ways that you can animate. Now, the first way is to turn on this auto keyframe, and the auto keyframe basically establishes that whenever you move something, it will automatically create a keyframe. So if I wanted this to be the starting position, these little dots are considered keyframes, so I can move those to the very beginning here. Now, if I then take my timeline, which is this red line, my scrubber, and I move it down over to the right a little bit, all I have to do is move my object, and this will automatically select or create a tween, an animation, between one point to the other point, basically. Now in order to do that, I have to have these two buttons selected, which is the auto keyframe mode and the auto transition mode. Now if I don't have those buttons selected, I can move my object as much as I want and it's not going to automatically create that tween for me. However, that's not my favorite way of animating. My favorite way of animating in Edge Animate is using the pen tool. So I turn those options off usually. And the pen tool, I can enter the pen tool by using this third button over here, or by double clicking on the yellow option inside of my timeline. If I double click using my yellow option or using the pen tool, what it's going to do is it's going to add this little blue dot on the top of this timeline. And now I can stretch out to the right my scrubber, and you'll notice this yellow line that's connecting the blue dot to my red dot or my yellow dot. Now if I move that timeline, that scrubber back, it's actually going to be a blue line that's connecting the yellow to the blue. This may be a little confusing at first, but the nice thing about this is once I've established this kind of the amount of time that I'm going to animate, all I have to do is move my object. And you'll notice that automatically, without me pressing any side of any keyframes or anything, it automatically creates that animation. Well, to go out of the pen tool, I just double click back over here, or I click on this button again, the toggle pen tool button. Now I can move this over if I wanted this to move later on in the timeline. I basically can double click to get back into it, stretch out the amount of time that I want this to animate, and then move it over again as well. And this I find a whole lot easier than selecting auto keyframe or selecting these different keyframe tools, and I can just have these different animations play. Now if I hit Control Enter or Command Enter, it will automatically start animating my object. Now this is all using CSS3 animations, JavaScript files, jQuery, stuff like that. And so you know this is going to work on any type of mobile device. And that's really how we've done a lot of our templates. Is if you come into here, I'm going to show you one of the newer ones that we're working on that will be really soon. This is our shootout game, and you'll notice on the shootout game, if I select one of these, we have our little soccer guy kind of animating, rotating, as well as our soccer ball kind of animating as well. We're doing that using the timeline, basically. We're animating the guy over, animating to the right, depending on what choices are made at that point. But that's the start of it, using that timeline. When you're creating these type of learning interactions, using that timeline to animate different objects at certain points, basically. Now, if I wanted this object to kind of animate on its own, I can convert it to a symbol. So if I wanted to right-click on this, go to Convert to Symbol, this is basically like a movie clip if you've ever worked with Flash. And so I'm going to say rectangle. And now what happens here is I can double-click to get into this, and I have my own timeline. You can see everything else is kind of darkened out. I have my own timeline that I can work with this rectangle that's independent of the main timeline. That means it doesn't matter if the main timeline is stopped. This will keep playing if you don't have any type of stop on this timeline as well. And so you can have nested animations as much as you want, and movie clips and different things like that, that you can really get complex animations there. But what I really want to get into, we haven't had we only got 15 minutes left, but really what I want to get into now is more of the interactive stuff, meaning that when you click on something, you want something else to happen. Now, the way that you do this is you establish inside of the timeline different parts of different questions. So, or you jump to different parts of the timeline if you want something to happen when something is clicked on. So let's go ahead and just establish a simple question here. And I'm going to turn off my keyframes here, my auto keyframe. And I'm going to have a simple rectangle or square, and I'm going to have a circle. Now, on these different objects, I'm going to ask a question, and I'm going to say, which one is the circle? Now, keep in mind this is being recorded, so if it is going a little fast, you can review this and get back up to speed on this as well. And we have other tutorials on Edge Animate that you can go through as well. So I'm going to go ahead and adjust this, go to 24 so I can see my question a little bit more. And now what I'm going to do is I want something to show as soon as this option is selected, and something to show if this option is selected. Now the way that you work with this is you actually work by jumping to different points in the timeline in Adobe Edge Animate. And so the easiest way of jumping to different points within your timeline is by establishing different labels on your timeline. So the way that you establish different labels is you take your red scrubber, move it to wherever you want, and then you click on this little rectangle right above the timeline, and or this, not rectangle, sorry, this triangle right above the timeline. And if you select that, it'll pop open a label for you to type in whatever label you want. So I'm going to type in question here. This is going to be the question section. Now I'm then going to come down a little bit later in my timeline, and I'm going to insert another label. Now this label is going to be circle. What happens when the circle is selected, it's going to jump to this point in the timeline. And I'm going to come down. I apologize, the labels are pretty small, so I'm going to zoom up on these for the recording, so keep that in mind. But I'm going to jump down a little bit later, and I'm going to add one more label, and so let's just name it square. This is going to jump, if that's clicked on, it's going to jump to the square point. Now, the way that you hide stuff inside, because if we come to the question, we're going to start out here, and let's say if you click on the circle, come to the circle, it's going to jump to this point in the timeline. We don't want the rectangle or the square to be visible at this point. So what we want to do is actually, it's a simple setting inside of your properties that you can make this hidden. You move your scrubber back to that point here, and you come up to your properties and select off. What that will do, you'll notice a little keyframe on your timeline that says from here, during the question part, it's going to be visible, but as soon as it jumps to the circle part, it is not visible now. And that's how you hide different elements whenever you're jumping to different points in your timeline. And so here, now I can say, let's add some text and say correct. And then we have our text here that's going to be visible once they click on the circle. However, you'll notice if I take my scrubber, move back a little bit, that correct is visible even before I get to the circle section. That's because I want it to not show until I get to the circle. So with my scrubber on the circle section, I can come back over to my properties, select the drop-down box, and say on, that up to this point it's going to be off, but as soon as it gets to this point, it's now going to be on. So that way, from the question, just take my scrubber back. From the question, it's going to be off, but as soon as I get to the circle, it's going to be on. So it's just turning things off and on at certain points of your timeline. Well, if I come over to my square, now I want the opposite to be true. I want the circle to not be visible on the square section. So I'm going to select my circle, and now I'm going to select this to be off. As soon as it gets to the square, it's now going to be off. Well, I want the feedback to actually, that's the circle feedback, so I want this one to be off as well. So at this point, it's going to be off. But now we need to go back to my rectangle, and I can select my rectangle in my timeline. And now I want to say on. At this point, it's going to be on. So we're adding different keyframes at certain points in our timeline. Things are going to be off and on. Well, I also want to have feedback for the square, so I'm going to go ahead and add some text here. Now again, if this is going too fast, you can review the recording and just pause it, work with it as much as you want afterwards. So now I don't want this to be visible until we get to this point, so we're going to come over and select on here. So it does take a little bit of setup, but it will pay off. This is how you create. You don't have different scenes or anything that you can jump to within Edge Animate. I kind of wish there was, but in this case, you just have different points of your timeline. But the one thing to keep in mind, if I hit Control Enter now, or Command Enter, you'll notice that it's starting to automatically animate it through my timeline. By default, Edge Animate will just start animating through the timeline unless you select an option. And that option is coming back to my main stage area. I come over to the properties and I uncheck where it says autoplay. If I uncheck where it says autoplay and hit Control Enter, now it's never going to autoplay. So I'm never going to get the correct and incorrect until I jump to those certain points in the timeline. Okay, so coming back into here, if I select this option, what I need to do, come back into the questions section. What I need to do is select some triggers or add some triggers to these different objects. So by selecting this object here, the way that you add triggers is in a couple different ways. So over on the left-hand side in your properties section, you have these little brackets up here that you can add triggers by selecting that option whenever you have something selected. Or you can come down to the timeline and select the brackets here as well. It's the same option, but it's just a different way of getting to it. Or you can come over to the Elements panel, which is over on the right-hand side, and you can select the brackets on that rectangle as well. Just 3 different ways of getting to the same location, so it doesn't matter which one you select. But if I select this Actions, when I have my object selected, make sure that's selected, I select my Actions, you'll notice that a drop-down box with all possible actions appear. So we have click, double-click, mouse over, mouse down, mouse up. Those are things to keep in mind. But if you're targeting mobile devices, you don't want to do anything with mouse over, mouse down, or anything like that. You do have touch start, touch move, and touch end. But those ones only trigger when you're actually on mobile devices. So those will never trigger if you're on a computer device or a laptop or anything like that. So it's best to stay in that case. A click will still trigger, a double click will still trigger. It's best to stay with the click, or you can add mouse overs, but also add a touch start and a touch end as well. So that way it'll trigger with the mouse on the computer device, but then if it's on a tablet or a mobile device, it will trigger on the mobile device with your touch events here as well. And then we have swipe left and a swipe right. This one I like a lot because you can swipe and to go to different things as well. And it adds just more mobile functionality basically. Okay, so let me come back here. Let me add a click event. I'm going to resize this a little bit so I can see. There we go. So on the click event, and you can have multiple different events. So right now this is the click, but if I hit plus, I can also add swipe left. I can also add a double click. And this pulls up with my code. Now I don't need to be a coder in order to do this type of basic functionality. If I come over to the left-hand side or the right-hand side, I have different options that I can choose from. Stop, play, stop at, play from, play in reverse, open a URL, set element text, like set different text if somebody clicks on something. There's a lot of different options to choose from without knowing code. Well, I'm going to do a stop, and it's going to add some code here. It's going to add sim.stop. But I want it to stop at a certain point. So that's where within the brackets, I'm actually going to, you can add a number here, and this will be a certain point. It'll go to 100 milliseconds of your timeline. But the reason why we added the labels is because it's easier to jump to certain points inside of your timeline. So here, I'm going to, because we have the rectangle selected, I'm actually going to go to, it's a little confusing. I named it rectangle, but inside of the timeline I have it square. So I apologize for that, but I'm going to jump to the square point in the timeline. So now if I hit Control S or Command S and then Control Enter, if I select that rectangle, it's going to jump to that point in the timeline of the square, and it's going to show me my correct. I can do the same thing with the circle. If I select the actions, select click, and then hit stop, and change that to quotes, I can name this circle. And now if I select the circle, it's going to stop at the circle. So this is the beginnings of basically a simple learning interaction that you can do within Edge. Now, it does take a little bit of getting used to. The nice thing about it is it's very flexible is the thing. So if you spend the investment of learning Edge, it's going to pay off in the long run, in my opinion. And it is the new Flash, in my opinion. And so therefore, you can do work with it a lot more you can be a lot more flexible and create really custom interactions that you can bring inside of Storyline, Captivate, or Lector, or anything like that. But one of the benefits about being a template library subscriber is we've done a lot of this work for you already. And so I'm going to spend a little bit of time of how to download these interactions that we've already done for you inside of Adobe Edge Animate. So if you're at the library, which is library.elearningtemplates.com, if you go to freebies, so even if you're a freebie, free accounts, you can still download a couple different tab interactions inside of Edge Animate, and you can use those as well. Or if you go over to Activities, hover down to Edge Animate Interactions, you'll notice all these different learning interactions that we've already built inside of Edge Animate. If I come down to Edge Animate Games, you can see, and there's more added each week, basically, so you can see all these different games that we've already added inside of Edge Animate. And so there's that little scrubber that we were talking about before. We have our button. Excuse me, I'm going to take a drink real quick. Okay, so we have our little button. We have different avatars here. We have questions, correct feedback, and then this feedback basically takes you to different points inside of a timeline, an animation. Well, if I was to download this project file, so if I hit download under project files, let me show you how this one was built real quick, or how you can modify this one. You still have the same Edge Animate files here, so you can open up the index.an file. And here's our marathon game, but you'll notice the timeline. The timeline, what we're doing is exactly what I just showed you before. So I kind of showed you the beginning of the structure of what we have inside of these Edge Animate interactions. So you can see when you click on the continue button, we're just jumping to the instructions. When you click on one of these objects, we're just basically jumping to question 1. On question 1, depending on what you select, we're jumping to correct feedback or incorrect feedback. In question 2, we're doing the same thing. Or after question 1 is done, we jump to question 2. And so it's basically just jumping to certain points of your timeline. Now, the game one, all you have to do is basically come in. If you wanted to just modify this, all you have to do is come into like question 1, click on the movie clip here on the right-hand side, and just type in whatever text or insert whatever object you want, and this will automatically add it to question 1. So if I hit Control S or Command S, and then Control Enter or Command Enter, I can see the change that I just made to question 1. So here's my rectangle. So we've done a lot of the work for you as far as the games go and interactions. Let me come to one of the freebie accounts. So you can download this on a freebie account, the tabs interaction. If I download the project file, you can see all we do basically is jump to the different tabs. And that's how you would set up if you're creating your own learning interaction. This is how you would kind of set it up, is have different points of your timeline that you jump to these different points depending on what's selected. So this one is a very simple code. If I select tab 1, it basically jumps me to tab 1 in my timeline. If I select tab 2, it basically jumps to tab 2. And I'm hiding different things and showing different things on the timeline based on what's selected. Now, a couple other things inside of here, inside of my keynote, that if you go to the slideshow, the slide share, we don't have enough time to cover it now, but if you go there, scroll down to the sounds. Basically, in the sounds, you can actually play, by using something called Edge Commons, you can play sounds within your Edge Animate interactions. You can also import, using a simple jQuery command, you can import and use YouTube video and other web content and other web video as well. This is all within the notes of the PDF. If you go back to, let me go back to that here. If you download the slideshow at this URL, that will take you to how to do that with the notes there as well. So I apologize we didn't have enough time to cover that, but hopefully in future webinars we can have specific information just on audio, playing video, or taking your interactions to a different level as well. So, but that's all that I have. So I'm going to go through the questions, and if you have any questions, I'm going to answer those now. If you don't have any questions, thank you for taking the time to attend this webinar. We appreciate it. There is a survey after this webinar. If you want to fill that out really quick, that'll help us improve future webinars. And so leave feedback or whatever you wanted to. But if you do have questions, just stay seated and I'll go through these questions as quickly as possible. Can you use open fonts? Is one of the questions. Open fonts I'm not as familiar with, but if there's an embed code, yes, you can. A copy of the webinar will be posted on the eLearning Brothers website. So let me go to eLearningBrothers.com, and it will be one of the blog posts that are down here. And this should be within the next day or two that it will be up there. So you have to check back there. Is it possible to work with Flash shortcuts such as F6, Shift F6? You know what? I haven't tried all those shortcuts. I believe some of them are true, or you can actually go in the preferences and in the help thing, I believe there's keyboard shortcuts. So edit keyboard shortcuts. And so you could modify it to be very similar to Flash if you've worked with Flash before. You can select click and a touch. Yes, you can have click and then you can also have touch. Although I would do, yeah, so on the click, basically what happened on the touch would only happen if it's on a mobile device, basically. Can you use Edge to create an app? Yes, you would have to create it inside of Edge and then you would have to export it or wrap it up inside of PhoneGap. So if you go to PhoneGap build, all you have to do is upload the HTML files. Can you export out of Edge with transparent background? Yes, you can. And this will be transparent inside of your other tools. In our Flash days, we completely programmed an e-learning course considering user interface, menu, SCORM tracking in Flash. Is it possible to do that in Adobe Edge? Yes, at DevLearn, I'm actually going to be doing a session that's specifically on that type of thing, is being able to add tin can to your Edge Animate and also kind of wrap it up in either jQuery mobile or wrap it up inside of like Adobe Muse or something like that. So there's a lot of different ways of doing that. How are you importing these into Storyline? Okay, so inside of Storyline, you basically go to File and you go to Publish, and this will publish inside of your project files. This will publish, actually, okay, I'm here. Let me go to my tabs interaction. So you'll have a publish folder. You go to Web, and then you basically take this file, all of the folder content, and you go into Storyline and use it as a web object. Why move around the timeline? Is there a way to hide on command? There is, but you have to do it by code, and to have that all within code, in my opinion, could get very confusing, especially when you're updating it. So it's a little bit easier to separate it in the timeline, but if you wanted to do it all by code, you have to do it by jQuery CSS commands, and to me that's not easy, so that's the reason why we do it within the timeline. I can build interactions like the one you showed us within Storyline. Why do I need a more complex process with Edge Animate? Storyline, while it's great, and I am a Storyline programmer, and we've created a bunch of these games inside of Storyline. Storyline has its limits. For one example, is as much as I want to say Storyline is awesome, because it is awesome, and we love Storyline, it's just there's some things that you can't do with Storyline. One thing is point-to-point animation. So if I come into Storyline games and I come into the Explorer one, actually let's go to the Marathon one since we've worked with that one, and inside of the Marathon, it's very similar to what we have with Adobe Edge Animate. However, you'll notice if I click on correct, the guy doesn't animate from this point to the other point. He just kind of jumps there. Well, with Edge Animate, if we go to Edge Animate now, this can be brought into Storyline, but you'll notice the guy does animate from one point to the other point. So it's more about if you're happy with Storyline, everything that Storyline can do, great. It's a great tool. I love Storyline. But if you wanted to do stuff like this where it animates from point to point and go beyond what Storyline can do, that's where you would do Adobe Edge Animate. And the same goes with what Flash used to do as well. When you want to go beyond the capabilities, that's where you would turn to Flash or turn to Edge Animate, in my opinion. What would you recommend when dealing with IE6? Great question. I didn't get to that yet. When you're publishing, if you go to File, Publish, or Publish Settings, there is, under the Web section, there is something called Use Google iframe for IE6. This will actually prompt them to install. You can decide if you want to prompt them to install or not. But this will prompt them to install a plugin, similar to like Flash Player. And once they install that, it will work on IE6, IE7, IE8, IE9 as well. And so they would have to install that plugin if they're working with IE6, or it would show the down-level stage content saying, if they don't have that plugin, it will show this content saying they need to navigate to a HTML5 compatible browser. Can you draw a motion path and animate to it? You can actually do that within CC. Yes, you can come into Adobe Edge Animate, and you can select motion path right here, and you can add on. You still have to add like kind of the keyframes. You don't draw it specifically. You still have to kind of move it along here. But you'll notice the path does get there. And so on the motion paths, you can also have an auto orient, or you could actually just select the motion path by selecting the different points as well and animate along the path there. So it's a little bit different, and I see Edge Animate getting updated all the time, so I hope that they have the ability to draw like you can in Flash. Is there an upgrade path from Flash? There is an upgrade Flash, or if you go to Edge Adobe and then you sign up for Creative Cloud, you do get a discount if you have earlier versions of Flash or anything like that. One question is, but I thought Google Frame will no longer be supported by Google. I am not aware of that. That may be true. I have not come across that myself yet. But it is, so far, it's still, the prompt is still there in Edge Animate. If you are building a series of test questions to embed in the e-learning course, are they trackable on the LMS? Good question. Right now, there's not, unless you actually embed something like TinCan API, but that takes a little bit more coding. And so these are more just, if you're going to bring this inside of an e-learning authoring tool, these are more just learning reviews before you get to the quiz. You'd still have to have a quiz. Can the path be curved? I believe it can. Oh, actually, yeah, you select a point, and you select any point on your little timeline here, and you just click on it, drag it out, and then you see the little handlebars that you can curve it as well. So yes, it can be curved. Okay, so that's all the questions that I have. We went a little over with the questions. I apologize, but if you don't have any more questions, thank you everyone for taking the time to attend this webinar, and have a great day.